Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Sana here. Sana is a strategic graphic designer. She probably first came to prominence within the left as being the architect of the original brand work for TWT back in 2016, 2017. Someone please correct me in the chat when the first World Transformed was. The personal opinion only. I still think it's probably the TWT identity which holds up with the most integrity. Like even through to this day, it's very timeless piece of like left design that's come out of the last kind of 5 years. Anyway, I will hand over to Sana, who will sort of talk to you for the next 40 minutes or so, and then we'll go to some questions. Feel free to use the Q&A box for questions and we'll box them off as they're answered. Please say if you would like to read them out yourself or whether you would like us to relay them on your behalf. And yeah, keep the chat box flowing with all of your thoughts and comments throughout the chat. And Sana, over to you.
Hi, I just want to check everybody can hear me. We're having a few technical difficulties at the moment with my video. Okay, bro. I'm just gonna kind of go for it. You can hear me, at least that's something. Bro. Okay, so my name's Sana Iqbal, and thank you for the introduction, Kev. That was really kind of you. So yes, I'm a strategic graphic designer and I'm also a board member of writing organisation 26. I have quite a varied kind of background. So all the way from working for kind of politicians to movements to a long kind of period of time, even in the corporate world. And that has given me a really kind of great breadth of experience to really understand how can we make effective campaigns. Now, how can we make design which truly changes people's hearts and minds? And kind of where it all began. So this is me over a decade ago. This is over a decade ago. And I've always had a great passion for art and politics. And for me growing up, I thought that's it. I want to be the next Banksy, and that's kind of my air of my direction. But I don't know if anybody else is from a South Asian background, but, you know, saying to your family, like, you want to be an artist or a creative, that was almost like a no-no. It was very much along the lines, well, how are you going to like feed yourself? You know, what are you going to do? Just paint? So I thought, okay, what am I going to do next? Because I really love being creative. I love art. But I'm very much driven to kind of make work which is going to impact people in a really positive way. So I thought, okay, the next best thing is I'm going to aim to be the next United Nations member of Security Council, like your average 16-year-old was kind of dreaming to do. So I started studying modern history, and we were given this essay in class, which was essentially to answer a question of how the Italian dictator Mussolini, how he was able to hold onto power for almost over 2 decades. So from 1922 all the way to 1943. And whilst there were so many factors, it really stuck with me that propaganda was such a key part of this, that Mussolini was able to create this mass media machine where he hired a whole range of graphic designers, filmmakers, artists, to essentially control and manipulate the masses through posters and leaflets and all manners of communication. And that really stuck with me because I was just so surprised by how powerful design can be, to the point that Mussolini was able to use it in a way which effectively controlled the hearts and minds of the Italian people and essentially, turn it into a fascist dictatorship. And it kind of got me thinking around my own kind of career, my love for design, but also this bigger question, if we use these types of techniques but for good. If we use them in an ethical way, let's say we created our own posters, our own leaflets and slogans, around, let's say, tackling the climate crisis, what a very different world we would be in. So very quickly, I thought, okay, I'm going to switch from my dreams of, being this big lawyer at the United Nations to going into communication design and kind of delving into this world a little bit further. And whilst I was at uni, I would start exploring the nature of politics with design, and particularly trying to find a way to make politics more engaging. That was something I was really interested in. I found politics to be something a little bit boring in times. Your local posters in your local community wouldn't always grab you. So I thought, if we made it much more accessible, what would our world be like? But along my journey, I've been working across a whole range of campaigns, and including even behaviour change campaigns for companies, all the way to kind of movements and getting people more involved in local politics and discussing topics such as Islamophobia in my local area. And I've always noticed that there's kind of 6 particular points where campaigns can fail. And these are challenges I've noticed quite often. And I've been really frustrated by this, but I hope that in my talk today, when I go through 2 case studies, that you're able to kind of see my answers, my antidotes to them. So the first reason why I feel like campaigns fail is toxic dominant narrative. So they're essentially what people say about you every day. What are the stories wrapped around you? And we often kind of fail to kind of tackle these head on. The second one is echo chambers. A lot of progressive campaigns, we kind of talk inwardly, we talk to people who already converted. And if we really want to make a movement and change, we have to talk to the cynics as well. A lack of motivation. So often we create campaigns and pieces of work, but we don't really tap into the reason why people should believe. Why should they come along to the protest? Why should they believe in your politics rather than the opposite end? Another reason is meaningless words. Now, this is really something we see a lot of in politics, and lots of empty language with no real substance, lots of waffle, which makes a lot of campaigns very inaccessible. Fact overload. I know this is something which was touched upon earlier, but often we're throwing lots of statistics and facts at people, but particularly in the age of fake news and people questioning what is the truth, and being bombarded daily with such an array of facts and figures, people switch off. And the last one to this list is form over function. I've come across a lot of campaigns which visually are beautiful, and as designers, we're always, clapping, saying, God, that's such a stunning piece of design, I love it. But I also ask ourselves, is this really tapping in to the emotions of the everyday person? Is a person on the street, would they be just excited by this than us? And sometimes that's not always true. So this is where I've realized campaigns fail, but hopefully today I'm going to show how we can actually make them a success. Now, to do this, we often kind of just focus on the design, and we just somehow think and expect that design will give us the answers. If it looks beautiful, if it's got a beautiful typeface and colors, it'll be really engaging, and that in itself will create change. And I found, well, that's not true. Over my years working for a whole range of organizations, I've kind of realized that you need 2 other things as well. You also need strategy and storytelling. And this is something I've developed over time, and I really feel it works to deliver change. And the reason being is that if you begin with strategy, you really start digging deep into the challenges. You start understanding, what's the purpose of what I'm doing? Who is the audience? What's the vision? Where do I want to go? And that really helps to kind of break down exactly what your brief is, what's the key messages you're trying to convey to the audience, and what is the action you want people to walk away with. And also the strategic side really kind of helps build the aspects of the campaign which targets the rational side of the brain. Now, like what I like to call the kind of magic dust, this is storytelling. So for me, stories is a universal tool. You know, it's something we've used right from the beginning of time since we were cavemen and women. And for me, you know, stories, they transform your own ideas into somebody else's experience. You can suddenly empathize with that person. You can really make a real connection with them, and it taps into your heart and soul. And also on a scientific level, stories, you know, they get your brain to release dopamine, which makes events a lot easier to remember, and you can recollect them with a lot more accuracy. So for me, they're kind of that stories are like the magic dust for any campaign. Then you can then go into design. You can take all the things you learned from the strategy and stories and bring them to life in a visual way. And this is where you can use things like color typography to kind of amplify those emotions and key messages. And that in itself will hopefully sway action. But as you'll notice, across all three elements, I have this word why. Now, for me, why is the motivation. You know, why should somebody get up to this protest? Why should somebody believe in your policies or believe in your way of thinking? Now, that has to sit across everything. And it's something I constantly ask myself at every stage. You know, why am I doing this? You know, is this color the right color? You know, is this story the right one? And keeping that motivation up, finding that kind of key point is what will make your campaign much more successful. So for me, this model is what I use all the time and kind of helps me create work which really kind of taps into people's, you know, minds as well as their hearts. So I'm going to talk through two case studies today. So the first one being the world transformed, which is the visual identity. And I'm just checking my video. Let's see if that works. Oh no, it's not. Okay, I'll continue on, but please continue sending anything into the chat or if you have any questions as well. So the brief I got for the world transformed was really interesting. They basically just asked me to make them a logo and what they wanted to do. So the world transformed was a 4-day fringe festival of arts, music and politics all coming together. And it was organized by this group called Momentum. And they were kind of birthed out of, you know, the rise of Jeremy Corbyn, who at that time in 2016 was, you know, the leader of the Labour Party. And the reason why they wanted to do this was they wanted to really revitalize left-wing politics, you know, and create a space where creativity can flow, ideas could flow, and almost create this beautiful utopian vision of the future. And I loved that. This is exactly what left-wing politics needed. It needed to be so much more exciting and invigorating and inspire kind of people to come along. And I knew immediately when I got this brief that a logo wasn't going to be enough. I had to create my identity because I wanted the festival to feel really professional, to really kind of show people that this was the next big thing and that they really should come along and feel inspired and enthused about left-wing politics and everything Labour had to offer. And so I begin with looking at the strategy. I said to them immediately, like, I want to talk to you guys a little bit more, understand, you know, why you're doing this, where it comes from, you know, what's your motivation, just to really start building that strategy and that brief a lot more clearly. And this is where instantaneously you start seeing challenges. And for me, the biggest one here was trying to fix the gap between the audience and the vision. So when I sat down with the team at the World Transformed, I asked them, you know, what do they want to achieve when people left the World Transformed? And said they wanted people to kind of walk away feeling like they believed in socialist values, that they could see that this was a way forward and this would really inspire them to become a member of Labour and hope that will get Jeremy Corbyn to win the next election and all the things they've been talking about at the festival would actually come true. And for me, that was such a beautiful vision and a real sense of hope. But then I started asking, okay, I love the vision, I love your purpose, so who's the audience? And the audience they were saying was, okay, we want to mainly kind of attract anybody who's left-leaning or is kind of deemed a socialist or an activist or a party member already in the Labour Party. And instantly I knew that was the issue. Because if you want to create a movement which essentially, you know, makes the world transformed, turn people into massive support for the Labour Party, which will then win an election, you can't just talk to this very niche group of people. You need to expand, you need to go further if that's ultimately your vision. So I said to them, I explained all this to them, and they realized, actually, you're right, we need to talk to a much broader group of people. You know, even what I would say, talk to the cynics, those people who are perhaps sat on the fence, in order to create a real movement of change. So that was how we formulated the strategy. And then it came around, you know, the story. What were we trying to say what were we trying to wrap around this event? And I was really conscious that we had just had the Brexit vote, and Britain was very much divided across families, communities, even within the Labour Party or across the political spectrum. There was a lot of toxicity in the air, and the aftermath just left this horrible feeling of division throughout the whole country. And then this in itself transformed this mood of like bitterness and anger at politicians. So I thought about this a lot and thought, you know, if I'm honest, if I was sat at home and somebody said to me, you know, on a Saturday, do you want to go down to Liverpool to a political festival? I'd probably tell them where to go after what we've just had. So I thought, okay, what's that motivation? What's going to get people up in the morning to really come along? Especially those who weren't activists, who those with that broader group were also trying to tap into. And I thought, well, with division, you know, I want somebody, for me, after Brexit and after the way the country was behaving and politicians as well, I want a place which would be full of hope, a place where anybody can come in regardless of their views and be able to express themselves freely and talk about politics and the future and what it means for them. And that was it. That's kind of where we started building this story, that we wanted the world transformed to be this place of possibility, to be a place where no matter your background, your political leanings, you were welcome, that it was inclusive, that when you come in, it would be a place of hope that would talk about the future in an optimistic way. It will focus more on answers and solutions. And that was essentially what the story was, which we wrapped around. And that was where I kind of started focusing the design. So instantaneously, I knew that, you know, as much as I love, you know, these posters, they're really powerful, I wanted to avoid any sense of kind of left-leaning design or protest graphics and go for something which was a little bit more kind of visionary, optimistic, had that sense of hope. And whilst I took kind of inspiration from them, if I wanted the world transformed to be seen as the future, I had to take inspiration for the past, but really turn it into something really new, something really radical and not seen in kind of left side of politics ever before. And it was also really important to me to do this for those people who perhaps weren't activists, who were a little bit more kind of shy in their leanings, because I wanted this event to feel really accessible. So for me, the tone had to be a little bit more bold, a little bit more kind of optimistic in order to entice that group of people in. And there was also a very much a strategic element. So Momentum in the news was getting attacked a lot as being seen as this group of, you know, radicals. And so if I use this political language, that would only reinforce it. And the right-wing media would kind of play on that. So I intentionally also pulled away from it to make sure that the media and the press couldn't tap into those tropes around Momentum and that kind of toxic narrative around them, that instead that they would even see them in a very fresh light. So when it came to the design, I started exploring how to express, hope and unity in this really symbolic way. So I started exploring different logo ideas. So was it about kind of building bridges, or was it around kind of building blocks and kind of building a better world, or kind of pulling people together? And I started playing around with all these different ideas here, but I knew that, it was kind of getting there, but slowly wasn't just right. But after lots and lots of exploration, this was the final design. And for me, the lines kind of interweaving together kind of gave a sense of coming together, unity. And my friend said to me, it reminded them of hands clasping together. And that for me was really powerful, because that was exactly what I wanted to portray, to kind of get across. And then I started expanding this visual language into something really vibrant and bright. And I took the lines from the logo and turned them into this visual identity. And I really wanted everything to feel really punchy, have a sense of modernity as well, and something never seen before. Because I really love the idea that people will sit on social media and swipe through their phone, and they would stop and be like, oh, what's this? Because the graphic was so bright and so punchy that you would want to kind of stop on your feed and kind of look. And then you'll dig in a little bit more. And then you'll realize, oh, this is a political event. And I love that idea. I really love that you would look at something and not notice it was anything to do with politics, but only when you were kind of bought in by the vibrancy and the energy of it, then you realize it was a political festival, that perhaps you were more inclined to come along because you were seeing politics, particularly left-wing politics, in a very fresh and different light. So these are photographs from the event itself. And I get a lot of questions asked to me about the use of colour. There's the assumption that because it's, Labour Party inspired kind of fringe festival, like why didn't I just go for red? And that was something internally with the World Transform team I had a lot of conversations around. And the reason being, dare I say it, I was inspired by the Tories. Shh, don't tell anyone. But reason why I say that is because the Tories went for a rebrand in 2010, and they did something really clever with colour. So they were like very dark blue, and then with their rebrand, they turned to turquoise and greens to kind of give across this feeling that they're very warm and friendly and that they cared about nature. So in that turn, if I wanted the world transformed to be this inclusive space for all, the answer to the division seen after Brexit, that I wanted to take all the colours seen across the political spectrum. So yes, red, but the greens and the yellows and the blues, I'm going to pull them together. Because for me, that was very symbolic and very powerful to say this event is very much about, no matter where you're from or your background or who you were voting for before, this is for you. You're welcome to come in and to be part of this event, and to showcase this feeling of inclusion very much together. And also it kind of said a lot about Labour. It was trying to say that Labour was a uniting party, that it could heal a broken Britain. And that's exactly what we wanted to kind of come across. And as you can see here, the identity kind of came alive in so many different ways. And one thing I really loved was the use of ribbons to kind of decorate the fence of the event. Lots of people who were driving past will kind of slow down and be like, what's this going on? And I really love that, to kind of build that intrigue around the city. And these are, again, more photographs of the event and the branding kind of coming alive. And with the World Transformed, I worked with them kind of assessing more or less lots of anything which was being branded. I wanted to look at it. I wanted a level of, dare I say, quality control, because whilst this was very much driven and run by activists, I really wanted everything to look professional. I want people to walk in and be like, wow, this is so well organized and so professional, that in turn they would feel a sense of credibility and trust, and therefore come along and support it. And I want to give a massive shout out to all the amazing volunteers who made it happen. You know, when I walked in and I saw kind of the state of the Black Key, you know, that in the bottom corner, you can see the front desk. That had a massive radical overhaul. That was like pink with broken brick and loose wires. And instantly I was like, right, if this is the first thing people see, it has to look beautiful. It has to invite you in. So where that poster is, behind it is literally covering a whole load of like loose wires and awful brickwork. That was really important to me, to make the space feel just really inviting and really friendly. And how I wondered to myself, you know, had this worked, had this identity and all the messaging and the story we created, had it achieved anything? Had it invited people who weren't necessarily, you know, Momentum supporters or Labour Party supporters to come in? And I was outside with the rest of the volunteers, kind of talking to people, mingling with people, asking them, you know, why they were coming, or kind of helping them around the event. Now with this one lady, and I saw her kind of hovering around the desk with all the posters. And I said to her, you know, well, introduce myself. And she immediately said to me, you know, at the last election, I voted for Liberal Democrats. I thought, oh, okay, that's fine. She said, well, I was really intrigued around the World Transformed and everything it had to offer. You know, it felt like an inviting space, and that's why I came in. And for me, that was really powerful, because that's when I knew that the strategy, the story, and the design had kind of really come together and worked, that the World Transform was really beginning to change people's minds. And that was really, really important. But none of that could have been achieved if I just dived straight into the design. You know, me sitting back and asking the World Transformed to clarify their aims, you know, brought up that challenge around the audience, which we changed. You know, me really starting to consider the narrative around momentum to what was happening in Britain. I made this motivating story around the World Transformed to be a place of hope and unity. And then the design would very much amplify that through this very bold kind of library visual identity. And the World Transformed was a success. You know, thousands upon thousands of people attended. It was quite overwhelming to see so many people, but it was fantastic to see all that hard work come together. The sign up for Labour Party members was really like high that day. It was amazing to see so many people kind of come up and sign up and want to participate. The right-wing media was also generally quite good, which surprised me. They had nothing really bad to say. So that in itself was really good. And those internally within Labour who perhaps began to be very critical of the World Transformed, in the end, were really praiseworthy. And then for the next few years, they've actually attended as guest speakers. So this was kind of a really great result for the very first World Transformed. So the next case study I'm going to talk through is an election campaign for Damien Egan. So Damien, I met him more or less after the World Transformed, and he wanted me to work on his branding for his selection campaign in his bid to become Labour's candidate for the Mayor of Lewisham election. And Damien, when I met him, he has so many great, fantastic ideas and so many great policies. And it was just so much we could work with. This is fantastic. You know, he's such a great candidate. I believe in him. I want to work and be part of his team. But I also was very aware that we had so many challenges. You know, Brexit was still very much the centre point of British politics. You know, austerity is something which particularly Lewisham and many other kind of Labour councils have really suffered a lot from kind of cuts. And then Damien was also kind of up against 4 other candidates. So he had a lot of challenges. And another one of those was that one of the candidates he was up against was kind of deemed the favorite. They had the support of Momentum, who organized a World Transformed, and Unite the Union, who's like one of the biggest unions in the UK. So already I knew for his campaign that we had very much a hill to climb in order to get him to win. So when I sat down with him, I said, look, I can't just make you a logo or take your copy and turn it into a leaflet if you really want to win. We have to almost follow this process if you want me to give you the best design possible. But it was also very clear that branding can't win you an election. Brand can, amplify your message or perhaps overcome any communication challenges, but there's so many other things behind the scenes you've got to do. And what I love about Damien, he's so collaborative and such a great listener. So he's very open to having me kind of on board as a designer throughout the process, which is quite rare, as a designer to be sat down with the team, even in the policy session. That's quite unusual, but that was really key for me to really understand everything about what he stood for, his values, and start pulling out, what were the best key messages to really connect with the votership. So that's kind of what we did. We started with a strategy, and I started understanding, okay, what was his policies, what was his values, and everything was, I knew already that I wanted to bring up the sense of usefulness, energy he brought along. He's very caring. I know he has a really great kind of history of experience, so he has a really strong leadership. So from a strategic point of view, those are all the elements I knew I had to amplify. But I knew it wasn't going to be enough, particularly with all those challenges he had faced, and he was kind of deemed as the underdog, let's say. So I remember we sat down in a Costa coffee, and I started, dare I say, grilling him and asking him more kind of deeper questions to basically understand, like, why you? Why should I vote for you, Damien? But don't worry, we're still friends afterwards, which is good, because I was a bit worried at that time because I've only just started making a relationship with him. But I started digging in a bit further, tell me a bit about your history, tell me about your background. Why should I vote for you over XYZ candidate? But through that, I found what I would call the golden nugget. He started kind of opening up a lot more about himself and shared with me his really personal story, that when he was young, he experienced homelessness. And that's what drove him into politics. And that's what drove him to kind of lead on a whole range of social home programs. And that to me was that nugget. That was the story which had to be the heart of his campaign, to really show that he was a credible figure and that he was somebody that, beyond just saying, yes, I have a whole range of policy, that he was authentic. So that was a story which was going to be central to the campaign. And storytelling for me was going to be so important because so many politicians give you an array of policies and all of them sound fantastic and brilliant. But a lot of people, including myself, sometimes get a bit tired. It's like you say all these great policies, but will you actually be able to achieve them when you come into office? So what I wanted to do was fuse the kind of the think and feel. So take together, his strategic policy, but fuse that with stories. So what I did here was that for every policy he had, pull out a personal story and to kind of communicate that, so that when people read it, yes, they'd be pulled in by the policy and what he would actually do for them, but there was also this added layer of authenticity. You could trust him because he wasn't just going to, upskill and help young people because it sounded good, but he actually, he'd lived it and felt it, and he knew what that was going to be like. So you're more likely to vote for him because you trusted him. He had these personal stories to really bring to life his policies. And when it came to the design side of things, I was given lots of kind of previous local election material to kind of be inspired by and kind of learn from. And it also helped me because this was my first election campaign all those years ago. And I really wanted to understand what people had done more recently to give me some kind of sensibility. And kind of immediately I knew I wanted to elevate these materials, because if Damien's brand was very much about amplifying that he was somebody who was open and would listen to anyone, I felt like a lot of these designs were quite inaccessible. Like there's lots of heavy text, and there's reams and reams of it. And it's like, will anybody really sit here and read it? And then you have like the leaflet in the middle where if somebody got that through the post, they're literally having to spin it around to read it. And that's not very user-friendly, you know. That's something I wanted to push back from. And little details like, you know, if you have so much copy, you're going to have to make the images and the text really small, and the end itself is really inaccessible. And Damien's brand was very much showing that he was somebody who was fresh, he was new, he was caring. So I knew instantaneously that I wanted to kind of push back kind of from this. But I knew in order to do that, language was going to play a really key part of it. So I worked with the writers of the campaign, and they were really fantastic because they saw the problems as well. They knew that people would never sit down and read essays of writing. And so I said, okay, so this is a minimum font size we're going to do. And if you can't fit the text on, we have to go back and reiterate it. And they were really open and really good, because there were points where I felt like I was literally sending stuff back constantly. And I knew it's such a hard job cutting copy down, still making your point come across clearly. But, you know, I wanted to kind of push them for that challenge, because I wanted people to actually read this material, to be inspired and vote for him. And if you think about it, if the average person is, let's say, you know, they've had a long day at work, you know, they've come home, you know, they're hungry and they just want to eat, and then they get this leaflet through and it has a whole bundle of material which has, you know, over 1,000 words, you're not going to read it. You're just going to be, okay, look at it at a glance and throw it away. So I wanted to make sure the material we were making was very accessible, and that the tone of voice is friendly, so there couldn't be any jargon. And I more or less said, look, if I can understand it, then hopefully everybody else can. If I didn't, then please go back and change the words. They have to be as accessible as possible. So when it came to the design, it kind of evolved over time, because this election was more or less delayed over a year. And then when we finally got the green light that it was going to go ahead, me and Damien kind of had a good chat about the work I had done so far. And we kind of realized it wouldn't work anymore. And that over a course of a year, the atmosphere, not just in Lewisham, but across the country, had radically changed. So when I first created this design, it was very much inspired by kind of nostalgic kind of Labour graphics with lots of creams and reds, but added in Futura for a bit of a more modern but friendly, you know, kind of vibe. And that was because I wanted to really pull out this type of optimism felt by the win of Jeremy Corbyn in the second leadership election. But now, you know, Labour was very much divided. There was so much internal fighting. Members were just exhausted by the toxic language within, and that we knew instantaneously that this design wasn't going to really amplify the message of unity and hope, which Damien was all about. And that was something which is one of his strengths. He's somebody who listens to everybody. He's very warm and welcoming. And that's something we had to amplify and kind of lean on instead. So I wanted to start pushing the design a little bit further and incorporating a lot more colors into it, so that members who perhaps were being suddenly pulled into this toxic kind of infighting and being divided between left or right or central knew that he was a candidate who wasn't going to get into that. He was somebody who, no matter where you sat within the party, that he was going to welcome you and be somebody who listened to you. And those were the messages you wanted to come across. very much around positivity and openness. And that's kind of where we changed the design. So this was more or less done within 2 weeks, kind of much a very quick branding shift. And this is an example of one of the kind of campaign leaflets. And as you can see, it's hopefully very different to the ones I showed previously. There's a lot more clearer, a lot more user-friendly, the language a lot more clear and concise. And, and to bring that message around, Damien being this figure of bringing people together, we had lots of photographs of him with local party members and going out and campaigning on the ground. And that was like kind of the central point of language for the campaign. But there's also something to be said here about under designing. So I know this doesn't look super flashy with an amazing visual identity, but that was done on purpose, because if it felt too slick, that would give out the wrong message. So I almost had to find this careful balance between it branding and looking good, but also not looking so branded it almost looked like he was a commercial entity, and he wasn't. And another part of the design process, which was important to me, was the experience of the volunteers, because they were going to be the driving force of the campaign. They were people who were going out of their way to give up their weekends to kind of work for Damien and help him and ring up phones. So their experience was very much important to me as well. So whether that was creating stickers for them to kind of write their own names on, or kind of wear when out on the ground, kind of a hashtag they can kind of talk about, why they were voting for Damien on Twitter, all the way to kind of these postcards. So if somebody wasn't in, they could write a personal message about why they were voting for Damien, kind of post it through. Again, that just added a bit more of a personal touch. And in the bottom corner, I wish I could take credit for this, but this was the campaign manager's, Nathan's idea about having these great stamps on all the kind of leafleted material, which said hand delivered by volunteer for Damien. And if Nathan, you're on here, I'm totally taking this idea from my next campaign because I loved it. It was something I wish I thought about. But again, every detail was very much thought about. Damien's brand, about echoing him, being this person who put people first and the community first. And after that whole year of kind of campaigning on and off, I'm really happy to say that, Damien went from, dare I say, the underdog to a winner, winning more or less 58% of the cumulative vote. And that kind of started with, again, me looking at the strategy, figuring out, what his values are we needed to portray, then finding that nugget of his stories, which kind of brought all his policies to life and showcased him as a authentic leader and person. Then the design kind of echoes those messages, but also made the whole campaign material really accessible and user-friendly, that people actually wanted to read it and kind of could read it. And hopefully when they did, they felt inspired and voted for him. And just this kind of, that story doesn't kind of end there. Over the summer, I worked with Damien again to kind of get him re-elected after 4 years to be Labour's candidate again for the next kind of Mayor Lewisham election. And we were given more or less a month to do this, which was really difficult, particularly when you're a designer. If you have a month for a campaign, that basically means you have a week to design it, because the brand needs to be done in order to filter into all the printed material, which then needs to be sent to the printers on time for delivery. It's a really short period of time. So instantly the team was like, okay, can we just reuse a brand from 4 years ago because we don't have the time? And I just had to say, no, it would be hard, but the story has to continue on. 4 years ago, this is how you looked. And now if you reuse that look and feel, you're almost symbolizing to the community, nothing's changed. You showed no progression. So we had to continue that story and work on all the amazing things you achieved and showcase your branding in a way which shows that journey, that now you had done all this amazing, successful work for the local community, but you're going to keep that work on and keep pushing Lewisham forward. And that's what the design kind of echoed. So just to kind of finish off and before I hand over, hopefully what you've learned today is that design alone can't influence people how to think, feel, and behave. But when you combine that with strategy, you dig deep into the challenges and the rationale behind people's minds, and then you combine that with that magic of storytelling, which is where you find that nugget of kind of emotional pull, and you pull that together with the graphic design, which will amplify these messages. That's when you can hopefully create fantastic movements of change and successful campaigns people can truly believe in. So thank you everybody for listening. And I'll hand over to Kev, who, by the way, I just want to go a little plug as well. Kev is being fantastic for pulling this together. Him and the team behind the scenes, so Christian as well, who's doing all the Zoom kind of magic. Just thank you as well for doing this today. I really appreciate it.
Finally managed to find an applause little sound effect there. It just felt so weird to end it without that. That was a fantastic presentation. You know, nothing without intent, I think, is you know, sort of probably one of the biggest takeaways that I can take from that. We've got a few questions which have filtered in, which will take this in a little bit of possibly a bit of like a lightning round-ish. Just looking at the time, we've got until the final keynote session. So Ian, are you on mic over there, pal?
Am I audible? Hello?
You are very audible.
Great. Right, so like Damien Egan, I'm Irish, 35 years old and living abroad. But I'm living in Berlin, and I was active in this campaign that just won a referendum on housing. Anyway, you may have read about it in the news. Yeah, we had this target group focused approach, and we had to think about quite exactly about what words we use and our design choices. Like, one of the things we did was not only have use flyers, but also create a tabloid style newspaper, because there are many people who, especially who are a bit older and not very political, who would be unlikely to even start reading a flyer. But I'm coming around to a question here, and that is that a difficulty we had, and I think happens in a lot of campaigns, is a dilemma between clearly communicating a certain identity, a left-wing identity, and being attractive and inclusive to people who aren't left-wing or political. Like, do you think was this a difficult dilemma for you? Do you think it's generally a difficult dilemma? How do we solve it?
So is a question, sorry, the balance between making sure that when you're making a brand for left-wing politics, that you're appealing not just to people who are left-wingers, but also the broader audience. Is that right?
Or if it's a difficult dilemma, do you think it's an important consideration at all to try to project a left-wing identity, or do you think it's all about just being attractive to people who aren't so self-consciously left-wing, which is a pretty small minority of the population?
I think I was definitely conscious of this, because you also don't want to alienate your audience, because as much as I was trying to, let's say, my design push further, push out that bubble, you can't alienate who your core supporters are either. So what I say is almost be respectful for, let's say, left-wing language or protest graphics, but kind of like you kind of extend the vocabulary a little bit. So even though, for example, with the World Transformed, keeping that kind of stronger typeface for me was really important, because yes, you had the really bold graphics and you had that red still kind of leaning through, but having a strong typeface of Colours and Sounds kind of help balance that. So I think it's very much about taking what we have at the moment, but let's say being respectful and pushing a little bit further, but also testing, experimenting. That's a really good way to go forward as well. Throw things out there, see what the reaction is like as well.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Grant, just saw Robin's question come in on Labour makes a lot of pre-made design resources. Is there any point in using them at all? And there might be one to come up. Lots of opinions on that one. That might be one for the keynote. I think we're going to move on to Gabrielle. Sorry. Please correct me when you come on audio. I think you had a question.
Hi, Sonia. I loved your talk. You kind of answered my question already in the previous question. And to follow up, I liked how you touched on notions of empathetic design. So I'm wondering, as we use the tools of graphic designers, marketers, advertisers, such as surveys and A/B testing, couldn't that take us away from what we really want to achieve?
So I think I understand your question in terms of testing. You think testing it too much?
Yeah, it's kind of that bigger question. Can the master's tools dismantle his house?
So firstly, I think design needs to be empathetic. That's what I've learned over my course of my career, that I need to really literally sit myself in the shoes of the people who I'm designing for. From, what's it like getting the leaflet through the post and having dinner to, walking past a world transformed, would they get pulled in? I think there's a level to be had about experimenting and getting feedback. All the work I've done wasn't me isolated. I constantly kept pushing back and forth with the team. So over at the World Transformed and even the Damon's team, getting as much feedback. And the feedback isn't necessarily to tell me, oh, Sana, but I really like this shade of blue. Can you make it that blue? It's more about me just understanding what their reaction was. And is that what I want? Do I want people to look at it twice? Do I want people to just be, oh yeah, it looks nice, but then nothing more? It just gives me a sensibility. So I would definitely say, when you're creating any work, keep sharing it with your peers, your friends, or your group of people. And that feedback would be really helpful in making sure your design is kind of tapping into where you want to kind of touch in people's hearts and minds.
Sorry, I realized I was on mute there. Literally nearly 2 years into life on Zoom and no way mastered this whatsoever. I think we've got another question queued up from Michael Lewis Williams. Michael, are you coming on audio? Michael's mic is busted. Sounds like the start of a tongue twister. I'll read out. I'll be Michael for all intents and purposes. Do you find when doing these sorts of projects, you tend to be searched out and headhunted by people, like with the example with Damien, or is it a case of making yourself known at events to get the exposure?
Oh, good question. So if I'm honest, a bit of both. So Damien came to me after the World Transformed, but if I'm really honest, the World Transformed took me nearly a year to get. And that was literally me banging on their doors, following up on emails, and even to the point where I was like, I know I can really help this group. And I was like, I'm kind of a poor intern at the moment, but I'm going to go down to London and just kind of knock on their office door. So I would say a mixture of both. I think it's definitely making sure you're known and talking to the people, following with them. But I think that's probably the more likely you have to keep knocking people's doors and showing that you're interested and you're passionate. Because if you convey that you actually care, people are more willing kind of let you in. Particularly, I found with kind of political organizations, it's a little bit more, I don't say secretive, but yeah, they're a bit more protective. And they have to be, because they need to make sure you're not a secret Sun newspaper journalist who's gonna wheedle their way in and get all the info and gossip and write an article. So you have to build that trust with them, and that's something I realized. But once you're kind of in, it's quite, you build really great friendships and relationships. But definitely portraying and showing your own authenticity and constantly knocking on people's doors is what I would say.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that, if there are any journalists from the Sun on here, please fuck off. We've got one more question and then we'll take a couple of minutes break before the keynote. It's from Sophie, whose audio isn't working either, so I'll be Sophie. So Sana, thanks for the impressive presentation. On your Damien Egan election publicity design, you said you were careful to avoid him looking too much like a commercial entity, but he wasn't. Could you expand on this? Both the previous speakers seemed okay about referencing the design tropes of capitalists like Nike, Adidas, etc. And where do you sit on this?
So on the point on the candidate, it's something I actually learned from when I listened to a talk by Michael Beirut. He did the work for Hillary in his logo for her. And it was really interesting because he said something that because her design perhaps looked too branded, it kind of played into her looking as a candidate who was very much for the corporates and the rich. And that wasn't what she wanted to portray. I don't know. I don't want to get into the politics of her, but the branding perhaps didn't help that. So instantaneously, when I did beautiful branding for Damien, but I kind of binned it because I was like, oh, I don't want people to then start thinking that he's this commercial guy who's, spent tons of money on me, when actually, local people have just been hit hard by austerity. So that's why you have to find that balance between not looking too slick, so that people don't feel like you spend tons of money when they literally can't feed themselves. So that's why I felt that balance. In terms of taking inspiration from the likes of Adidas and Nike, perhaps not my brands myself, but I don't see why not, in a sense of I like expanding myself to a whole range of people and different viewpoints, because I feel like you can learn a lot. Like I said earlier, like the work for the World Transformed was only because I sat and studied like the Tory party, who's literally the opposite end of the spectrum, which then made me learn how they use color in a way which is so effective, which I then pulled in my design. So I would say open yourself up to everybody, see what you can learn from them, and then pull that into your practice.
Cool. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sana. I don't know if I've still got the, yep, still got the clapping sound.
Thank you.